Hey guys, I'm Eugene Bach with Back to Jerusalem. And if you've been watching the news in the last couple of days, like many of our friends have, you're probably asking yourself, what is happening in Syria? And I know that it's very easy to get war fatigue, right? I mean, we've been seeing what's happening in Israel, with Gaza, with Lebanon, with Iran, with Iraq and Turkey, and now Syria. So there's been so much happening in that region that many of us have just kind of tuned out. What is happening right now in Syria is a big deal. And what I'm going to share with you here in this very, very short video are things that you probably have not heard from the mainstream media. I'm going to make it as simple as possible, but this impacts everyone. Guys, when there was a problem in Iraq, when ISIS invaded Syria and Iraq in 2014, the overflow came swinging into Turkey, EU, Canada, America. You will see the results of what's taking place in Syria. It directly impacts your life, and I believe that what is happening is on a biblical scale. First off, nobody saw this coming. I mean, for the rebels to take over Syria this quick at the rate that they did, I don't know of any prophet out there that prophesied that this was going to happen. I don't know of any politician that was ready for this to happen. And I definitely did not think that Syria would fall to this HTS rebel group that has just declared that what has happened in Syria is going to happen in Iran next. That is big news. But there's a couple of things that I want to share because people have been praying for the situation. I just talked to our Chinese teams that have been working inside of Syria, and the information that we have, I think, is a little bit different than what people are hearing in the news. So to make it very simple, I'm going to share what this means for China and what it means for Christians, especially now, right before Christmas. If you look at what is taking place with the rebel group, what I'm just going to call it HTS, that's what everybody else is calling it, without getting complicated with names. You have this rebel group HTS that is just swept in from Aleppo into Damascus. And they've taken over the capital of an area where they had a dictator that's been running the country for about 50 years. Why this is a big deal is because what we see right now is the HTS is a rebel group that is split off from ISIS and al-Qaeda. Now, much of the mainstream media is almost sharing this new rebel group as if they're a little bit more moderate. They're a little bit more rational. They're a little bit more reasonable than the president of Syria that just left. Now, do not get me wrong. The president of Syria was a brutal dictator. But, this is a very strong but, there were Christians that we have been working together with, said at least there was some significant stability. What are things going to be like now after the HTS has taken over? And that has been a big question, especially for our Chinese missionaries. Now, there are a couple of winners and a couple of losers, clear winners and clear losers that benefit from this rebel group. So if you're trying to figure out whose side am I on, let me share that there are no good sides to be on. If you were not for the president of Syria and you think that HTS is going to be better, I think that this video is going to disappoint you because you have two groups that are going to be competitive in how bad they can treat other people, how bad they can violate human rights, and how bad they can persecute Christians. But let me just share a little bit about those that are on the side of HTS, or let me put it this way. Those that were on the side of Syria and the National Army, and those that actually lose from HTS taking over. First, we know that Russia had a huge blow. just over the weekend. The HTS moved in Damascus on Sunday. On Saturday, the day before, a meeting was being convened in Doha, Qatar, where Russia was trying to make inroads in negotiations to be able to calm things down in Syria, only to wake up on Sunday morning and find that the entire meeting was meaningless. It was worthless. So Russia didn't see this coming. The Qatar government didn't see this coming. Russia feels like a massive loser, which is understandable, right? Because Russia has been engaged in Ukraine. So even though they've been basically propping up the regime in Syria, they have been sidetracked with the war in the Ukraine. The other big loser is Iran and their proxy Hezbollah. Iran has been fighting against ISIS since 2014. This is a group that branched out from ISIS. And when the leader al-Jilani came into Damascus, the very first thing that he did, and you're not going to hear this anywhere else, is he went to the oldest mosque that is over 1,000 years old in Syria. And it is the location where Christians and Muslims both believe the head of John the Baptist is kept. So there was a church that was at the temple of Jupiter. So during the Roman occupation of Turkey, there was in Syria. So Turkey, Syria, which was a part of the Roman Empire, right? There was a temple to the Greek gods in this area of Damascus. And it was there that when Christians began to grow in Syria, you have the oldest churches in the world in Syria. You have the oldest Christian kind of minority groups in Syria that still speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus. Many of them began to congregate, and they built a church right there where the temple of Jupiter was. And this large basilica became a worship place for the Christians. And so when the Muslims came in, invaded, and killed the Christians, or killed many of them, they soon took over this church, which is where they believe that they kept the head of John the Baptist. And then they tore down the church and they rebuilt a mosque. It is this mosque that the leader of HTS came in and began to make his first speech. And in that first speech, he basically blamed Iran for much of the problems that have been taking place in Syria. He called Syria Iran's playground and said, it's not going to happen anymore. I'm putting a stop to it. And so Russia lost big time when HTS took over Syria and the National Army of Syria fell. The other big loser was Iran. And because Iran has now basically is out of favor in Syria, where that's a big deal. For those of you that don't know, when it comes to the proxy war against Israel, Iran has been stashing their weapons in Syria. They've been bringing their drones into Syria. They've been bringing their troops into Syria. They've been supporting their proxy soldiers in Syria. So Syria, in many ways, has been a playground, and the people of Syria have suffered as a result. So this has been a big challenge. And now we can see that Hezbollah is also one of the big people that have lost. Who are the winners? Well, we can't really point to too many winners, but there are some people that we can say have benefited from HTS taking over. One of the immediate people that is almost an answer to prayer in some ways. I want to be very, very cautious here, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. But Israel is a short-term winner in this scenario. And the reason why is because the enemies in Syria against Israel are now scattered. The enemies of Israel that are in Syria are now trying to find their footing and readjust. And Iran is now pushed out of Syria for the most part. This is good news for Syria. This is also somewhat good news for Turkey because Turkey has been pushing for this. The problem that we're going to see is that now there's going to be refugee outflow from this area. Also, Turkey does not have control over Syria, definitely doesn't have control over HTS. And when we look at this from the perspective of a Christian, because there's a lot of people that will say, hey, what does this mean for Christians? And this is what I want to share. What does it mean for China? And what does it mean for Christians? So I've just shared a little bit about Russia, Iran, Israel, Turkey. But when we look at China specifically, China, at least in the immediate aftermath, is a loser in Syria. The reason why is that they have been pouring a lot of money into Syria. Syria just signed on to their One Belt, One Road initiative, and a lot of money was supposed to go to Syria to be able to help them with the rebuilding process and would also allow China to have access to their natural resources. So this is something that has really impacted China because now they've lost a lot of their investment, at least in the short term. They can turn this around by re-engaging with HTS, which I foresee China will most likely do. However, this shows an Achilles heel for China because China's been kind of touted in the mainstream media as having a lot of influence on Syria and the Middle East politics. In fact, China was considered to be one of the people that could possibly bring and broker a peace agreement between Hamas and Israel. They were not able to do that. Most people let China off the hook and said, you know what? Nobody can do that. But now we see that China's influence in Syria, who supported the national army and the dictator that was just kicked out, China supported them openly. And this shows that the very person that they supported has now been ousted. This is a big deal for China because it's been estimated at as many as 50,000 Uyghurs have been fighting in Syria. Now, if you're not familiar with Uyghurs, they are the Muslim minority group of Western China. They are considered a terrorist group in China. In fact, China sent its number one top military unit known as the Siberian Tigers, Siberian Night Tigers, into Syria. So China has sent troops into Syria. They've made military investments. They've also brought Syrian soldiers into China to train them, to teach them. This is a big deal for China, and to have the Syrian government fall so easily shows how little influence China actually has over the Middle East and Middle East politics. So China's losing a little bit with the fall of Syria. And right now, that's bad news for China, especially for the One Belt, One Road initiative that is going straight through Syria. That is bad news, but it's salvageable, okay? So even though politically, financially, militarily, economically, this is not good news for China, it is salvageable. One of the things that we saw in Afghanistan is that al-Qaeda ran to China. Al-Qaeda has a good relationship with China. Al-Qaeda was one of the very first groups to congratulate HTS when they took over in Syria. And there's a good reason for that. They're basically the same. This is something that you're not going to really hear in the mainstream media, but as you pray for Christians, let me just share this. What does the current situation in Syria mean for Christians? Right now, it's trading one bad dictator for maybe a worse dictator. And I think the best way to describe it is to look at what happened when Saddam Hussein fell in Iraq. The situation did not get better for Christians. In fact, it got worse. When we see Gaddafi fall in Libya, the situation did not get better for Christians. And in fact, in many ways, it got worse. when we look at Iraq, when we look at Libya, we're basically looking at Syria. Syria, what happened in Syria is a continuation basically of the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring that took place over 10 years ago is spread into Libya, spread into Egypt, and we saw it go throughout the Middle East. One of the areas that was able to hold on to power was Syria. And Syria has been propped up by Iran. They've been propped up by Russia. But now the rebel forces of al-Qaeda have taken over. Now, what you're going to hear in the news is that al-Qaeda and HTS are different groups, that al-Qaeda was too violent. Very much what we heard about with al-Qaeda and ISIS, that ISIS was, too violent for al-Qaeda, and that's why there was a split. What I'm going to share here is knowledge that you can easily look up. This is very easy stuff to find online and to prove whether what I'm saying is true or not true. But it's important for you to know as Christians, and it's not being shared by the news. Why? Like I said at the beginning of this video, I think that 1, we have a general fatigue. 2, there was a big election in the U.S., and the news is still kind of wrapped around that election cycle. And so not a lot of people are paying attention with what's happening in Syria. And those that are seeing what's happening in Syria just feel that that's another person's war that has nothing to do with us. However, if you are a Christian, this has everything to do with you. We are in the middle of spiritual warfare. So if you look at the Arab Spring, and al-Jilani, who is the leader of HTS, the leader of HTS basically was, not basically, he was also the leader of Al-Nusra Front. Al-Nusra Front was an extreme Sharia law group that participated in the movement in the Middle East when it came to the Arab Spring. They fought, quote, I'll read directly from here. This was a direct quote from the Al-Nusra Front when they were talking about their fight more than a decade ago in Syria. They said, "We are here only to accomplish one mission, to fight the regime," meaning the Syrian regime, "and its agents on the ground, including Hezbollah." So from the very beginning, Al-Nusra Front, which was run by al-Jilani, was to fight against the powers that were in control in Syria, as well as the proxy agents from Iran. So this hasn't changed. This is still at the forefront of al-Jilani's focus. And he said that when he walked into the mosque, where it is believed that John the Baptist's head is being held, and he made the announcement that there is going to be a change in the Middle East, which was a direct threat to Israel. Now, this has been about 10 years in the making. Even though HTS says we split from ISIS, even though HTS said that we split from al-Qaeda, even though al-Jilani, as he's being shared on CNN, the most recent interview with him, and by the way, it's not by coincidence that al-Jilani decided to do his interview with CNN and not Al Jazeera. He is definitely sending his message to the West, and you're going to learn why here in a minute. This is so important, and yet nobody is sharing it, and I don't know why. But Christians need to know. The guy who was the mentor for al-Jilani was al-Zawahiri. Al-Zawahiri, if you remember, was the mastermind of 9/11. He was the main partner, known as the guy who was like the doctor who worked together with Osama bin Laden. There was I think it was a $15 million bounty on his head, and they were finally able to kill him. This is al-Jilani's mentor. And you can look this up on Wikipedia. Please go to Wikipedia and you'll find this information there in many different articles, because this is not secret knowledge. This is just, I'm trying to compile this for Christians. 5 things that you need to know that al-Zawahiri shared with al-Jilani. And he said this, 5 things. As the mentor, al-Jilani needs to do, I'm going to read these 5 things here. It says, it is better to integrate the movement within the Syrian revolution and its people. So the movement being Al-Qaeda, being ISIS, it doesn't matter what name it goes by. In fact, al-Jilani said in the mosque in Syria, just in Damascus, just yesterday, he said, plain and clear, I don't care what name you give us. When he was with CNN, he said, I don't care what name that you give us. We can fade out into any name that you want. What is important is the vision. And for this movement of the vision to go forward. Now, what is the movement? It's an extreme jihad-controlled movement to bring about Sharia law, to bring about the extreme version of Sharia law. What we've seen in Afghanistan with Al-Qaeda, what we saw in Syria and Iraq with ISIS. So he says, number 1, it is better to integrate the movement within the Syrian revolution and its people, meaning that don't be so focused on what separates you, but come within the rebellious movement. Use the momentum of the local rebels to overthrow the Syrian government. Don't focus so much on pure ideology. The pure ideology can be worked out later. First, work with those that are the enemy of your enemies. That's number 1. Number 2 says, coordinate more closely with all Islamic groups on the ground. So forget about the pure ideology and the coming of the caliphate, the ruling of Sharia. But number 2, come together with those other Islamic groups, not the Christians, not the Jews, not the secularists, not the Westerners, but the pure Islamic groups. Come together with them and the rebels within Syria itself to overthrow the government of Syria. So that's step 1 and step 2. 3, contribute towards, and I'm reading directly from the translation that al-Zawahiri gave to al-Jilani. He says this is the HTS blueprint. When you're thinking about what does it mean with the overthrow of Syria, what does it mean with this new rebel group? Is the new rebel group really like they are being portrayed in the news? Are they really rational? Have they changed? One of the things that you'll hear is al-Jilani, he's gotten older. He says that, when he was younger, he did some extreme things, kind of like being a radical leftist on the streets, kind of protesting against big businesses or corporations. It was kind of that thing. Except the only difference is that, we cut off a few people's heads. We stoned a few women for adultery. That was just my younger days. And I've grown out of that phase. I've become so much more of a rational, logical person now. Don't believe it for a second. That's all a part of the plan that was given from al-Zawahiri to al-Jilani. So first, work together with the Syrian revolution and the people. Second, work together with the Islamic groups on the ground. Third, contribute towards the establishment of a Syria-wide Sharia judicial court system. This is where methodology starts to come in. One of the things about al-Jilani is that he's being very methodic. He's learned that you just can't run into the fray screaming Allah Akbar, that you have to train people. They have to have discipline. In the CNN interview, one of the things that I realized that as he was being interviewed, he showed military discipline in ways that most Middle Eastern leaders are not capable of. Go on to any YouTube clip of when Saddam Hussein was in charge, Gaddafi was in charge. Look at what the Ayatollahs say. They're always so passionate and usually do a lot of bragging that shows how immature they are. When they say that, we will defeat America in the east, in the west, in the north, in the south, wherever they come from, we will smash them, we will destroy them, they will never be remembered, they will be wiped. All this rhetoric that comes out about how they are going to beat the Western army so bad. One of the things that we see with al-Jilani is that he was very disciplined. In fact, when he came out, he said that he did not want to say anything that could not be proven. So what he wanted to do was to say, they were asking him on CNN. They asked him, they said, what is your plan? How are you going to attack Damascus? What have you learned from your battles in Aleppo? And he basically said, I don't want to give away any information. We can't be relaxed on what we are doing. We have to be focused. We need to be disciplined, and we need to set up a system of government, a system of ruling, a system of what was told to him, Syria-wide Sharia judicial court system. This is a man that wants to set up a long-term government system. So that's number 3. Number 4, use strategic areas of the country to build a sustainable al-Qaeda power base. This is what he's doing. He's changing the name so that it makes it more palatable for those that don't know what's going on. This has made it more digestible for the Western media. When they think of Al-Qaeda, when they think of ISIS, when they think of the Taliban, the West has a natural knee-jerk reaction because they've seen the death, the destruction, the terrorism, the way that they go after women, the way that they go after Christians, the way they go after minorities. That imagery is now there. So to erase it, HTS was set up specifically to fool the West and separate this new rebel group from their old atrocities so that they can be perfectly positioned to create new atrocities. And number 5, this is number 1 really in what they need to do. Important. Listen carefully. I'm reading directly from the translation. Cease any activity linked to attacking the West. They realize that stop fighting multiple wars on multiple fronts. Pacify the West so that you can do what you want in Syria. Once you build up your armies, once you build up your strength, once you build up your base, then you can start attacking the West. Until then, play nice. This is the words that was given to al-Jilani from al-Zawahiri. This is 5 things that were detailed out, written down, and recorded. And I wanted to share that together with you because this is a big deal. As we move into Christmas, we have the oldest Christian societies in the world that have just now come under the control of this group. But the good news is God is always in control, and his enemies are always trying to strike fear into the heart of his followers. But God has given us a strength and a peace and a joy that passes all understanding. And because of that, I want to continue to ask people to pray for those that are in Syria. Before Christmas, we are going to give a gift to the Christians that are in Syria through the Chinese teams that we've been working together with. If you would like to be a part of that Christmas gift that we're going to give to those that are suffering in Syria today, you can go to backtojerusalem.com. We have a disaster relief section. This is a man-made disaster that we are seeing in Syria. You can donate there. I want to thank you so much for joining us in this Back to Jerusalem podcast. Again, I'm Eugene Bach, coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of Germany. Thank you so much. God bless, and Merry Christmas.